And so we're just so thankful to you for joining us today, to allow us to make hopefully an even greater contribution. And for that, we continue on with our intros and just explain that our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. That manifesto he produced in 1968 that lays out the strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism. I'm not going to explain what the strategy is because, this is 2023. And I'll tell people, well, we're Pan-Africanists. Well, I don't agree with that. Well, what is Pan-Africanism? Blah, 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 blah. You don't know. So if you're going to disagree, you should be able to tell us what the strategy is. And you should be able to tell us why it's not an effective strategy. And if you can't do all of that, you got work to do. We are not going to do everybody's work for them. That's the problem now, is we all need to see this struggle as something that we each have a responsibility to help contribute to. And Our Ancestors' Voices, again, is a program for the APRP every Sunday, same time, same place, hosted by myself, Ajamu, and Shakura, my biological and ideological child. We are both active in the APRP. So to get us started on the topic today of the political legacy of the Garvey movement, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you, kind sir. I appreciate that. Greetings all. Hope you all are safe and well and living your best lives. So we are so excited to bring this topic back again because it's important that we continue to think about just how foundational our ancestors have been. And when we give props to our ancestor, Marcus Garvey, we literally would not even have the flag that we have as Africans without Garvey and the work that the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA, did to help contribute to us. I would even take a step back before that and say this is why, first of all, we should want to be our ancestors, because without the UNIA and without Garvey, we wouldn't have a flag to represent who we are. So you all know I'm talking about our flag. I'm talking about the red, the black, and the green. And we understand that each color represents a different part of our legacy that we as a people have contributed to throughout the world, not just in the Americas. And so I think it's important to think about that flag and what it represents and how the UNIA has contributed greatly to helping us have a more foundational and prideful impact when we think about our mark and our legacy. But I would even take it a step further back than that and just say that, Pan-Africanism, I would say, was really foundational for Marcus Garvey. And I think that he really understood by traveling to these different parts of the world. I remember reading Garvey and Garveyism and work study. So the only reason I can give you this information on him is because I have done the best I could with trying to find every approach I could to increase my political education, because I belong to an organization that is working for justice, that also believes the importance of increasing political education. And so I've been privileged, if you will, to have access to reading material where I can develop my brain as a muscle, because there's so much that I still need to learn, and there's so much that I still need to understand, so that I can try to make a difference for the people who are coming before me, after me, and even my comrades who are alive with me as I speak. And so we have to give much praise to the UNIA and to Marcus Garvey, because I remember reading from the book, Garvey was traveling all over the world. And he was noticing that no matter what country he was in, what city he was in, Africans were struggling from a social, cultural, socio construct and cultural standpoint. We were struggling. So we were struggling in Jamaica, which is where he was born. And he saw that we had very high impoverished levels. He saw that we were struggling to make ends meet. We didn't have consistent income. We had issues getting access to food insecure, all of these different things. And then he traveled to the US and he saw that it was the same thing here. He traveled to other parts of the world. I think he went to Canada and even parts of Europe. And he saw that not only were we struggling with poverty there, we were struggling with food insecurity. We were struggling to find employment. It was a struggle for us to find employment. He also saw that we were having issues issues, and we represented large incarcerations in terms of jails and prisons throughout all of the different locations he traveled to. And he made one conscious denomination and one denominator where he saw that the bottom line is everywhere we are struggling. And he alluded that to understand that Africa itself was struggling because the people who descended from the continent were not in a position to protect the continent from colonization. And so this is why the slide title is so important, why we make our own history, because Garvey made a conscious effort with the help of the UNIA, or the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And you literally hear it in the name. Universal, meaning Pan-African. Negro, he really meant African, but he was still growing and learning at that time. Improvement Association, meaning how can we improve the destruction that colonization has done to our people? And he said the best way to do that was to take us back home. He said the best way to do that was for us to get back to our roots and get back to our continent so that we could relearn all the things that had been beaten out of us. And for some of us that we had died not remembering because it had been beaten out of us before we were killed. And so I would go back to the flag and say, in addition to wanting us to literally have the opportunity to get back home, he was trying to think of different ways with the organization's help so that we could continue to have more of a union with each other. He wanted us to be connected to people all over the world who also descended from Africa. And I want to say that the UNIA understood that creating this flag was one of the best ways to get our attention around the world, because wherever you are, if you saw this flag and if you were affiliated with the UNIA, then you had a better understanding for how we were all connected, which was still pushing this line of Pan-Africanism. It was still pushing this line that we needed to understand that our trials and tribulations were not just unique to the Africans in Canada, and they were not just unique to the Africans on the continent. They were not just unique to the issues for the Africans in the Caribbean, and they were not just unique to the issues for the Africans in America, but yet everywhere around the world, we were facing these issues. And so it would be up to us to find some better ways that we could connect with others, whether it was joining the UNIA, volunteering our services. I remember that both of his wives, Amy Ashwood and Amy Jocks, and I may not have said them in the right order, so forgive me, but both of them contributed in some way to the development of the UNIA. And I also remembered one of my favorite pieces that the UNIA offered was they had one foundational way that they were communicating with us. Because remember, we were all over the world. So they were finding ways to send out newsletters. And the name of the newsletter was The Negro World. And so I just remembered reading from the book, Garvey and Garveyism, that they must have published that newspaper in probably 30 or something different languages, because they understood that, unfortunately, with colonization, we didn't all speak the same language. Some of us spoke French, some of us spoke Portuguese, some of us spoke Spanish, some of us spoke a more traditional African language, some of us were colonized to speak English, some of us were colonized to speak another language. And so I was just blown away when I read that. And I think about how Garvey didn't have the kind of resources that we have now. He didn't have Zoom to give an international broadcast. He didn't have the internet. He didn't have the same income that we have access to. The UNIA was not a very wealthy organization, because a lot of organizations that work for justice are not. They're literally supporting one another as they go. And I think part of how they made their income was by selling the Negro World. And so just being able to make income off of that newspaper was critical. But that newspaper was also a huge asset that sent information literally around the world on what was going on with us. And so people who were in Jamaica could read about what was happening to Africans in Cuba, and they could read about what was happening to Africans in the Americas. They could read about what was happening to Africans in other parts of the world, even if they never, ever, ever would have the chance to go there. I mean, you want to talk about Pan-Africanism and making us feel like we were connected. More importantly, making us understand that our conditions are not unique to us, which means that we need to fix the conditions for everyone, not just the conditions for ourselves. So really, he was teaching us early on what it meant to not be selfish. And he was teaching us that we needed to understand that we had a responsibility to help change those conditions for others around us. And so if we look at some of our other ancestors on these slides here, we see Huey P. Newton, we see, I think this is Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah, we see Che and Fidel Castro. We see our comrade Anna Mae Pickwash. And then, of course, we see Assata Shakur. These are all just different contributing factors of other folks who have influenced Garvey, but have also influenced us as an organization, as the All African People's Revolutionary Party, because they've made it clear that they are interested in doing what is best for either poor people or colonized people or African folks or any combination of that, where they have been working tirelessly to figure out how to change the conditions for people around them because they were tired of seeing us struggle. And in some cases, you're talking about people who are not even African, but still made a sacrifice so that either their people as well as Africans could benefit from it or vice versa. And so, yes, we should very much understand that we have the power to change how we make these decisions that will then affect the history that we are choosing to do. So we all have a responsibility today, right now, to join an organization that's working for justice, because eventually the choices that you make today and the present time are going to become the future, which means later in life, when you are older and when you may not be moving around as sprice as you are now, those choices that you make tomorrow will eventually become your past. And so for the younger generations, it's going to be up to them to understand what choices you made today on August 27th at whatever time it is in the time zone that you're in. And if you are still not in an organization that is working for justice today, then you are doing a detriment to the history that is to come. Because every single person on this slide had the same choice that you had, and they chose the people. They chose the people every single time. They never did not choose the people. And if they had chose just once not to do something for the rest of humanity, one of us would not be sitting here today. Many of us would not be in the political state of mind that we're in. Many of us would not be as selfless as we are because we would not see the value in joining an organization working for justice. Many of us would not be as healthy as we are. Because if we think about all the sacrifices these folks have made, many of them have provided health clinics that have eradicated syphilis and things like that, sickle cell anemia, that are detrimental to our communities as a whole. So we have to really, really think about how the choices we make today truly become part of history or herstory or their story in the years to come, you all. That's what we've been saying to you. It was never about you. It was never about you joining an organization that's working for justice. Sure, that's going to impact you as a person, but we're challenging you to think more critically than just yourself. We're challenging you to understand that the choices you make are still impacting other people. That's why we asked you to join an organization working for justice, because you have a responsibility to make the world a better place for everyone else around you. Yes, you have that responsibility. You don't have that responsibility alone, but you do have that responsibility. And if you choose to ignore that, then you're no better than the capitalists. You're no better than the colonizers. You're getting in our way. And we can either struggle with you and help you see the light, or we will do what needs to be done by any means necessary, because you're not going to stop the rest of us from achieving a humane society. We deserve that. We do not deserve to live in this messed up society that does not value people or life and wants to put money above. That is not a life that none of us should have to live in. It's not a life that we should raise any more children in, because these children deserve so much better. They deserve so much better than what the system has brought them to do. I just read about the college student in South Carolina who went to the wrong house and got shot. And I keep bringing these examples up because, as triggering as they may be for us to talk about Jacksonville and for us to talk about South Carolina, we need to understand, you all, that it doesn't matter who you vote in office. That's what we're trying to tell you. If you feel that voting is the best way for you to make a change, then you need to figure out a different solution, because you've continued to vote for different people, specifically people who claim that they're going to reduce gun violence, and they claim that they're going to defund police, and they claim that no more Africans are going to be shot, and they claim they're going to give police more body cams, but yet Africans are still being gunned down. Africans are still being raped. Africans are still being kidnapped. We are still being violently murdered. And those are only the names that we know about. There are plenty of Africans who have literally disappeared off the face of the planet, and we will never, ever, ever have peace knowing what happened to their bodies. So it does not matter who you vote in office. That's what we've been trying to tell you. What does matter is whether or not I'm talking to you decide to join an organization that's working for justice. Because if you really think about it, you not being in an organization that's working for justice has done nothing for the people. It has done nothing to help contribute and change conditions. However, you can't compare it to you being in an organization working for justice because you have yet to do that. And if you have already done that, did you really give it your all? And did you give it a decent amount of time before you decided to quit? Did you make it a priority to make sure that you were showing up and you were prepared for the meetings? You're going to have to take this seriously because people are still going to be gunned down. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Now, are people going to be gunned down after you join? Yes, because we don't matter and we're insignificant. But the more we organize against it, the more we can have a way to stop it. And before we're going to get to a point where we're going to be able to prevent it after we stop it. And then we're going to be able to maintain that prevention, because some of us are going to be working on changing the conditions, but a lot of us are going to be working on taking back the power of Africa. And once we do that, we'll be able to change how people think about Africans, which means we'll be able to change how people don't want to treat Africans, because Africa itself is not respected. So why would the people that descend from it be treated any differently? Next slide, please. Okay, so, I just want us to highlight this a little bit more and just really think about how Garvey and the UNIA, but really just other organizations that have continued to work for what we're doing, how we have a responsibility to just think in more detail about what these organizations have really done for us. And so really, what does that mean that they've done for our people? And even the UNIA was around many, many moons ago, but we are still being impacted by the role that the Universal Negro Improvement Association did for us. We're still being impacted by the work that Garvey did. And I know my dad is going to talk in more detail about what happened as he got later on in his years and how they weren't able to do their first voyage. But I still think it's important to highlight the intentionality of what he was trying to do, because you have to understand, at that time and age, it was not common for an African to even want to go back home. That was just not common. And so from Garvey, he understood part of the problem is that Africans haven't been home. That's part of the problem. That's why they're acting like this. That's why they're acting like they don't know who they are, because they don't. They don't know who they are. Colonialization has done a number on them, and they don't know who they are. And I think that if we, as the UNIA, help Africans get back home so that they can understand what their responsibilities are, because then they will be able to see what all they have access to, because they will understand just how rich the continent of Africa is. And once we have that conversation, they're going to start behaving differently, because they're going to want to protect what Mother Africa has provided, because they will start to understand how much Mother Africa has done from them. You'll start to understand that you are who you are because of what the continent has done for you. That continent has sacrificed for you multiple times. Every single time resources are stolen, Africa is sacrificing for you. Every single time somebody rapes Africa and takes a piece of land or starts fracking on another part of the continent that we don't know about, Africa has sacrificed for you. All the ancestors that are buried on that continent have surely sacrificed for you. And yet we're sitting here using cobalt and coltan and not thinking about how we still have a responsibility. It doesn't just stop with them, you all. They died so that we could continue their legacy and we could continue to move forward, working to change the conditions. Because if we don't work to change these conditions, the world is only going to get worse. Don't you see that? It is only going to get worse. So we have to push as hard as we can to resist. We have to push as hard as we can. And with every breath that we have in our body, we have to push. We have to resist. We have to be against. We have to be anti. We cannot accept any of the systems of oppression that are trying to push against us. Because anytime that we let them in, it's almost like if you're trying to blow up a balloon, right? And so you have all this air in the balloon, but you don't want to let any of it out because you're trying to hold on to it. Maybe it's the last balloon that you have and your child is really enjoying playing with that balloon. So you want to make sure that once you tie it, you lock that air in. But if the child is playing with the balloon outside and you know that the child let the balloon go and it's starting to fall close to the grass, you know what's going to happen. Now, your child may not understand what's going to happen because they're just having a new experience and not understanding that life has consequences sometimes, right? But you understand what's going to happen when that balloon hits the grass is it's probably going to pop. And then all that little hole is going to let all that air out. So we have to protect every piece that we have, which means we have to protect every single integrity, structural integrity that we have. And that means fighting for Mother Africa. That means fighting in every aspect, fighting ideologically, fighting mentally, fighting physically. We have to fight as much as we can. We gave examples of what it meant to fight physically because we are tired and we are sick and tired. So we've been fighting in Haiti. We've been fighting in Montgomery. There's somebody probably fighting right now that we don't know about, but we'll learn about it tomorrow because of the coltan and the cobalt that we have access to. So I think it's important for us to think about how with every single scenario we've talked about, there were people who were sacrificing for the greater good of someone else. So you're not going to be able to make this work if you yourself are being selfish, if you yourself are being individualistic. It's simply not going to work. It's not. Because the ancestors weren't individualistic. Had they been that way, none of us would be here right now. Because part of that means that they wouldn't have even have gave a darn about reproducing. So we literally would not be here. But we also wouldn't be here ideologically had it not been for them. Because we know about all that they did to sacrifice. So it's really up to us is what I'm trying to say, you all. Marcus Garvey is depending on us. He's depending on us because if you're looking at the slide I'm looking at, these are not trustworthy people on the slide. They are not trustworthy because their objective is to protect capitalism, which means you and I, because we are threats to the system, we're going to have to be taken out because that's what you do with the threat is you take it out. You neutralize the asset, right? That's what all Hollywood media movies say, right? Neutralize the asset. So that's what we're going to have to do. Is we're going to have to figure out a way to continue to resist and be considered threats, be considered risk, and do what we need to do because every single one of the ancestors who came before us did what they had to do. Fannie Lou Hamer was considered a risk. Marcus Garvey was considered a risk. Kwame Ture was considered a risk. Elaine Brown is still considered a risk. Assata Shakur is still considered a risk. These people are scared of our ancestors because of how hard our ancestors have worked to make sure that we have a decent humanitarian way of life. And there's nothing wrong with that. We deserve that. As I said before, we should be fighting for our kids. We see George Washington on the slide. We know that George Washington cared nothing about making sure that the world was better for Africans. It was always about profit for him. It was about profit for Obama. It's about profit for all of these people on here, but they will lie to you and make you think that they're trustworthy. And because we don't have the kind of political education that we need, we're not in a position where we can really break down what the lies are. And we're not in a position where we can understand just because they look like us doesn't mean we can trust them. You have to understand this system of capitalism has convinced even the most of people that you think look like you that they are in a better position to protect the system, which means they are the threats, not us. They are the threats, and we need to get them out the way so we can do what Africa needs us to do. If you are not African, then that means you need to do what your land needs it to do, because if you're colonized, you're in the same boat that we're in. And we don't need to just achieve Africa. We need to help our comrades who are missing their land. We need to help them get their land back too, because colonized people need to stick together. We all gain more power when we all get our land back. So again, we're pushing collectivism, we're pushing humanitarianism, we're pushing egalitarianism. Those are the principles that we're pushing. We are not pushing individualism because it has no place. It has no place in this struggle. It has no place in this place and time. It has never had a place, not for what we're trying to do, because it didn't help us get where we are. It helped the oppressor, but it didn't help us get where we are. So we need to remember what we need to rely on. And what we need to rely on is each other. What we need to rely on is political education. And what we need to rely on is the choices we make today affect our future and our history tomorrow and the next day. As I said before, and I'll say again, if you are still not in an organization that's working for justice, I would strongly encourage you to make a change and make a decision before the end of this year, because we need you. And I'm glad that you all are coming in and listening to the seminars, but we need much, much more at this point. We need much, much more. And if you're not ready to join an organization, I respect the honesty. But we do need your support in another way. Maybe you can support bottled waters, because as hot as it is, we're still out there doing that work. Maybe you can support us financially, because supporting African businesses is something that a lot of people just don't do. So we need to think about supporting um, organizations that are working for justice, I should say, not African businesses, but organizations that are working for justice it's not considered sexy to do that. That's not considered cool. It's more cool to support Zionist organizations and to support racist organizations or misogynistic organizations, right? That's really cool to do those things. So we need to change that. We need to change that ideology, and we need to start supporting organizations that are working for justice. And maybe what you could do is each month you could support a different organization. Maybe in November, you could donate all your funds to the American Indian movement. I'm sure that would be a really good way for you to not celebrate Thanksgiving. So just think about that, you all. But we have a responsibility. This world is not going to wait for us. And quite honestly, this world can't wait for us, because it is literally deteriorating because of all the heat. So we really need to do something. Otherwise, we're not even going to have a planet to save. So then nobody's land is going to be able to equal power, because nobody's land is going to exist anymore. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, Shakura. And I think that it's important to just build on what you are talking about as it relates to the Garvey movement. So I just want to jump right in and say, why are we still talking about Marcus Garvey in the Universal Negro Improvement Association? Garvey founded the UNIA in 1915, and the organization reached its height in terms of the work it was doing probably 7 or 8 years after that, in the early 20s. So you're talking about an organization that really existed 100 years ago. So why are we talking about the UNIA in 2023? And I think the answer is a clear one and an irrefutable one, because what Garvey was able to do, even though, as Shakur said, he never himself made it to Africa, he didn't physically set foot on the African continent. He did travel throughout Europe, as she mentioned, and throughout the Americas. He did travel a lot throughout Central America, particularly. So, and of course, the Caribbean, where he was born and raised. So he did establish those Pan-African roots. And I think probably the most important contribution that he made, and it's real popular now in 2023 for people to criticize Garvey, and it's easy to do that. He didn't, you have to contextualize the period in history in which he existed. This was a mere, right during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, the so-called Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. And as I mentioned, Garvey founded the UNIA just 2 years before that. So the rise of the UNIA happened right along the time of the world's first socialist-oriented revolution. So the concept of socialism was brand new at that time in the world. So although Garvey was no socialist because of that, clearly that's true. We're not claiming that he was, but a lot of people today want to use that as a criticism against Garvey because he was promoting capitalism. But I would argue that that's a reflection of what the level of consciousness was at that time. We didn't have the background of information on socialist development and revolution that we have today. So he was operating based on what he had. But I think the important thing to think of as it relates to Garvey's legacy and contribution is that he got our people focused on Africa. He got us focused on Africa 100 years ago, and he wasn't the first person to do that. But until he did do it, no one ever had done it to the degree and to the expanded length that his organization did it. And that is significant because a lot of what came out of the Garvey movement are things that are still widely practiced and recognized today. And that needs to be acknowledged. Now, people can say whatever they want to say, but there is more than enough documentation for me to understand that it certainly happened that Elijah Muhammad was affiliated at some point with the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Although a lot of his followers today want to deny that, I'm sorry, they just don't have the receipts to justify that. We've done our history. And so clearly, if you look at the doctrine of the Nation of Islam, a lot of that came out of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And without question, the Moorish Science Temple, a lot of that, Noble Drew Ali came out of a lot of the members of the Nation of Islam, and the Moorish Science Temple were members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. That's irrefutable. I don't care what the hell people say. They cannot refute that. That's an absolute fact. So Garvey's movement deserves credit for that, because they gave the impetus that allowed people to move into these other organizations with these other types of focuses. But for those of us who are fighting for our mother, Africa, Garvey made a major contribution towards helping us see the necessity. Even though the lens wasn't entirely clear, he certainly didn't see the point of understanding the necessity for a united socialist Africa in 1915, and nor could anybody claim that he should have seen that at that point. And he certainly had other elements of confusion, being confused about the Zionist movement, for example, the Balfour Declaration in 1917, where Britain declared Palestine their personal property. He certainly had confusion about that. But I think one thing that Garvey did do that we have not been confused about ever since, over the last 100 years, is he declared that Africa is our home and belongs to us as African people. And that is an irrefutable point, because if you're a moral person, if you're a person that stands on principle, and a lot of us aren't, a lot of us go wherever the easy route takes us, but if you're a moral person that stands on principle, then you have to recognize that these lands in America belong to other people. They belong to the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. And so if you're understanding that people say revolutions are based on land, and that's absolutely correct, and revolutions improve the lives of the people who fight those revolutions to transform society, that's absolutely correct. And the resources from the land give the people the power to function, exist, and develop, and to continue to advance humanity. All of that is correct. But if you acknowledge all of that, and there's no way not to, if you have any sense between your ears, then you have to also acknowledge that as African people, there's only one land base that we have any moral right to, and that's Africa. We don't have any right to these lands. These lands were stolen from the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And the only Africans who deny that are Africans who know nothing about Africa. I've met thousands of Africans who deny Africa, and I'm not a single one of them could tell you anything comprehensive about African history. Not a single one. So, and I challenge you, if you're one of these people watching, well, I know all about Africa and I'm not an African, I challenge you, reach out to us. We'd love to show you where you're confused. So we know that this is a contribution that Garvey made to our people, and it's a very important one. And, you know, Shakura, one correction, they didn't publish, the UNIA didn't publish the Negro World in 33 languages. They published it in 33 countries in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. But that diminishes nothing from what you said, because again, this happened over 100 years ago. And like you said, and you're absolutely correct, most of us today got internet, strong internet, whatever the hell kind of internet it is that reaches every room that we're in. We got hotspots, we got social media accounts on everything, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, your mama's book, every kind of social media that could be imaginable. We can't get 5 people to cut a pecan pie together. And here these Africans 100 years ago published had a publication in 33 countries in English, Spanish, and French. And here 100 years later, they published this in 33 countries in 3 languages. And then 100 years later, it's Negroes running around here talking about, I ain't no African. I mean, that's like, you know, you see that if Martians land here, boy, those people have gone backwards over the last 100 years. These people were putting in the work, and we're building and contributing on top of that work. We're not trying to go backwards and become more committed to being slaves on the master's plantation. What kind of nonsense is that? What kind of foolishness is that? Well, we were always here. We were always here. We've been here thousands of years. And y'all are the ones who are paying these European companies hundreds of dollars or whatever the hell I don't know what you paid. I would never do it. But you're the ones doing it and getting these DNA results. And you don't have one test nowhere that says that your family been here thousands of years. You know damn well you don't have that because it doesn't exist. You were stolen from Africa, and we're telling you that because it's objectively true, not because we want you to claim anything we're claiming. Look, trust me, most of you, I don't want you anywhere near Africa. Please understand that until you agree to humble yourself and learn something about your history. I will physically fight you from spreading your cancer in your brain over to our homeland. So that is not why we're saying what we're saying. We're saying it simply because it's objectively true. And that's it. And the UNIA developed self-sufficiency programs that did so much to raise the consciousness and the unity of our people. Now, people, we know about the Black Star Line. We won't get into that. You should read about it if you don't know about it. But I want to point out that I was watching this old movie the other day, Hoodlum, with Lawrence Fishburne, and Vanessa Williams is in it. And she plays a love interest of Lawrence Fishburne, who's playing Bumpy Johnson, who's playing Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson in Harlem. And Vanessa Williams plays a love interest. And Vanessa Williams is playing, this is in the 20s. She's playing a member of the UNIA, and she's got a booth there in Harlem, and they're distributing food, and they have literature on Africa, and they're doing that. This was critical work that the UNIA was doing. I mean, it's a Hollywood movie, but because of the influence of the Garvey movement, they had to acknowledge that, because you can't talk about Harlem in the 20s and not talk about the work of the UNIA. So when we talk about Garvey and Pan-Africanism, that's the legacy that we're standing on. And Garvey's efforts were unquestionably focused on uniting African people all over the world, rather. 100 years ago, Garvey was traveling to and writing about Africans in Mexico, Africans in El Salvador, Africans in Guatemala, Africans throughout Central America whose ancestors have been stolen in Brazil from Africa, like those of us here in this backward cesspool empire country, and helping us understand that. Now, there's still a whole bunch of us today that are confused. A lot of us are so damn confused. We think we're the only Africans in the world who were enslaved here in the United States of America. I mean, that's a disgrace if that's your level of consciousness about the chattel slave system. It's just what happened here in the US. That's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. You should be ashamed of yourself, because if that's all you understand, what you're saying is that your close relatives who were kidnapped right along with your other family members, and instead of being bought and purchased by ships coming here, were taken to the Caribbean or South America, you just dismiss and deny them. That's why we're so dysfunctional now. We don't know where the hell our family is, and we're so damn dumb. We don't have enough sense to think about, hey, I need to understand where we are so we can reconnect as a people worldwide. That's a difference with our history. Nobody else has that same history. Nobody else was kidnapped and scattered all over the damn planet. And they've convinced you all you got to worry about is what's right in front of you right here. This is what Garvey was trying to help us understand. I watched a video last night of a sister from the Dominican Republic. And she lived here. She was born and raised here in the US. And she's talking about how dumb Africans are here. They think they don't understand that Africans exist all over the world because of colonialism and slavery. And she was talking about correctly that Africans actually came to the Caribbean before they came here, because y'all know you love white supremacy. So you should know that Columbus came here and crash landed in the Dominican Republic and started taking out the Arawak people. Y'all should know that better than anybody. You love America so much, then you should know the history of it. So they brought our people here with them to do the work. They weren't going to do it. So they kidnapped our people and brought us here. That was before people even came to this cesspool and built this cesspool empire on our backs and on the backs of the indigenous people and Asian people and poor European working class people. So that's the history. Garvey was talking about this 100 years ago, irrefutable, and his effort to connect the skilled African technical abilities of our people to African resources like Liberian rubber. This indicated, even though he didn't have the proper economic analysis, it did indicate his understanding of internationalism and the necessity for a Pan-African solution to our people's problems. Definitely, clearly indicates that. And if you don't know the history of Firestone stealing, sabotaging the relationship of the Garvey movement with Liberia and forcing the Liberian government through the US capitalist government to sign a 100-year contract with do you know that contract they signed in 1924 expires next year for Firestone Rubber and Tire. And Firestone has been, from that time forward, 1924 has been wreaking havoc all over the African continent. See, we don't know anything about this stuff. We don't know anything about this. All we know about Firestone is, well, I bought some nice radio tires. I mean, we think like children, you all. There's no other way to put it. I showed it by some nice, and then they threw in some nice rims. Well, I came up on something. You came up on idiocy. We have got to know our history. So we don't need to be selling. We need to, and then many of you would sit there if some Africans ran into Firestone and smashed and grabbed. See, they steal and they should. How the hell can we steal anything from Firestone? They've been stealing from us for the last 100 years, all over the damn planet Earth. If Africans rose up tonight and robbed every goddamn Firestone store on the planet Earth, we would still be not repaid everything they stole from us. So this is why we need to wake up. We are so confused. The master got us, so don't let them steal anything from us. This is our property. You gotta protect our property. You gotta protect the master's property. I don't give a doubt they burn every goddamn Firestone store down. And the thing about it is that the problem with it is that they're not doing anything with what they get to advance the people's struggle. That's the problem we have with it. Not that I don't give a damn we shouldn't be cooperating with this system. What the hell is this? When the hell has this system ever cooperated with us? And you can't answer that question because there's no answer. So Garvey's movement gave the Pan-African movement mass character, millions of people, and then connecting Garvey's work with the intellectual work of W.B. Du Bois. And I'm sorry, we're not going to be like you. We're not going to approach Garvey and Du Bois with a gang mentality, with a set mentality. We're not going to do that. We're not the Vice Lords and the Blackstone Rangers. We're not the Bloods and the Crips. We're trying to unite our people. We're not the Belgium backing the Tutsis and France backing the Hutus, and we're just doing everything at their bidding. We're not functioning like that. We're living, thinking people, thinking for ourselves. So we're not pitting Du Bois and Garvey against each other. We're uniting the contributions that they each made. That's what unity looks like. A fool could take somebody and pit them against each other. It takes a dedicated, mature person to figure out how to take the best of everything and use it so that we can advance collectively as a result of it. So let's spend the last couple of moments just talking about the downfall of the Garvey movement, because there's so much that we have to learn from Garvey that we still haven't learned. Just based on what we're doing or not doing, it's clear we haven't learned it. So we think the most important lesson is the one about political education, because the lack of institutionalized political education within the Universal Negro Improvement Association set it up like it set up all of our organizations for easy infiltration, easy sabotage, manipulation, and ultimate destruction. So I talked about Garvey's confusion about the Zionist movement and the creation of the state of Israel. That's an example. Like, that's a lack of political education that allow us to be manipulated like that. And he wasn't the only one. There are many of our people, even today, that are confused about Zionism. a ton of us who were confused about it. But also the fact that the UNIA had no systemic political education is the reason that many of the people who joined the UNIA did it because it was the latest hot trend. And they saw it as an opportunity to create resources for themselves. You know, if people don't have political education, that's what happened. They began to see the movement as something that they can capitalize on to bring resources to themselves individually. And so that's what a lot of people began to look at the UNIA as. And this type of opportunism did not go unnoticed by our enemies. J. Edgar Hoover, who cut his teeth in the Department of so-called justice, we call it Department of Injustice, in 1919 in this country, his first major case was the Garvey movement and taking down the Garvey movement. This is before the FBI even called itself that. That's what J. Edgar Hoover was doing. And so he was able to put people on the UNIA, and it didn't take them long to realize that there were certainly people in the UNIA who were breaking these people's laws. They were using the mail to solicit money that they were going to stuff in their pockets and keep, not give to the UNIA, because they saw the UNIA as an opportunity for them to do that and to exploit the people, because that's what people without political education do. And the FBI, or before that time, the Department of Justice, J. Edgar Hoover, they knew that that was not Marcus Garvey doing that. He was not the one soliciting people to send money and pocketing the money. He wasn't doing that. He was living like a pauper to make a contribution to his people, even though he believed in capitalism. And he had some things that he did, like an automobile here and there, but he was not living in a luxurious way that would justify, you know, that he was out for himself and was bilking the people out of their money. He was using the lion's share of the money the UNI collected to try to build the projects they were trying to build, like the Black Star Line, like their connection to Liberia, like the things that they were doing, the Negro world, et cetera, and so forth. So Garvey manipulated that and used the fact that other people were doing that to frame Garvey and arrest Garvey. And of course, the rest is history. They were able to do that. They were, because they wanted to frame Garvey and destroy the Garvey movement, they were able to deport Garvey in 1927 from the US and send him to England, where he died in 1940, penniless and without a movement. And that's sad. But what's even also worth noting is the white left, because the white left played a significant role in contributing to the sabotage against the Garvey movement. You know, the white left, you know, they always want to act like they're our friends and they're here with us in the trenches. I've never seen it. I hope to one day see it. That would be great to see it, but we're certainly not holding our breaths waiting for that. But they were very instrumental in sabotaging the Garvey movement in the 1920s. At the Second Socialist International in the 1920s, they came up with the concept there of the Black Belt South and giving Africans land in the South. And that came from the white left, from the influence of people like Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. They were the people that influenced that concept of the Black Belt South. And the reason why they did it was not because they thought Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Georgia were viable solutions to white supremacy, but because they wanted to create a program to compete against the success and the popularity of the Garvey movement. That's why they suggest they didn't give a damn whether it was a viable solution for all. They wanted to do was recruit Africans into the white left political parties that were operational at that time. So it's important to say that because they were foundational in reaping the consequences against Garvey. And many of the other Africans, many of them who are people who we should respect, like C.L.R. James from Trinidad and George Padmore from Trinidad, great Pan-Africanists, both of them. But they were caught up in that time of jealousy against Marcus Garvey and were very happy to, you know, write and talk against him and against his movement. All of this played a role in undermining the Garvey movement. And the reason why we're telling you about it now is that we have to learn not to contribute to our enemy's work against our movements, because many of us still do this today. And it's much easier to do it now than it was 100 years ago, because they didn't have Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all of the TikTok and all of this stuff that you all got now. And you can't wait to get on Facebook and denounce other people in the movement. You can't wait to do that. And this is what led to the sabotage of the Garvey movement. So 100 years later, we still haven't learned this basic question. And I don't give a damn who you are. If you are on social media criticizing any element of your movement work, you are working for your enemies. Whether you mean to do it or not is 100% irrelevant. Whether you know you're doing it or not is 100% irrelevant. If you got a problem with somebody, take your lazy ass phone out, dial their number, call them up and tell them you ain't worth a damn to me, and here are the reasons why. Have the courage to do that. And stop talking about people on social media. I don't know what the hell is wrong with you all. Maybe we just need to just dedicate some money in our organizations to counseling services. Stop doing that. You are aiding and abetting your enemy's efforts to sabotage our work. And if you don't see what happened to the Garvey movement is clear proof about that, only thing I can recommend to you is a therapist couch. I mean, because clearly, like, it's just not getting through to you that this is what we're doing when we do that. So stop doing that. And the emphasis on one leader is another problem. You know, this cult of personality, that Garvey is the leader, Nkrumah's the leader, Elijah Muhammad is the leader. We have to be honest with ourselves, people. What has that approach gotten us? What has it gotten us? Because once we identify that person, even if they're sincere to the mission, they're going to die. And when they die, we're not prepared to carry on because everything relied on their decision-making, their vision, their what they thought the organization needed to do. That's why the concept of cadre leadership, which is what we have in the APRP, it's always made sense to me for that reason, because they can't pick on. Kwame Ture's been dead a quarter century. And I would argue we're stronger today. It's not even an argument. It's irrefutable. We're wider. We're in more places in the world. We have greater capacity. I was here when Kwame was alive. I can say this. We have greater capacity. We are in a better position to fulfill our mission today than we were when he was alive. I don't think there's any refutable argument that can argue against that. So kudos to Kwame Ture, because he had the humility and the commitment enough to know that it was never about him. It was about building cadre. That's what we have to do. We don't need one leader. I'm sick of hearing that. The problem today is we don't have no leaders. No, the problem today is you're out of your goddamn mind. That's the problem. We don't need a leader. We need people to make a commitment on a collective level. That's what we need. And the lack of a class analysis, which is related to some of the confusion Garvey had about Zionism and some of these other, political positions. But it also speaks to the necessity of developing that type of class analysis so that, we can look at Garvey from a historical and dialectical materialist perspective and understand that had his movement continued to develop at the same degree it was functioning at 100 years ago, the question of being the mass character that it had, the question of socialism would have had to have come into the forefront. It would have had to have come into the forefront because clearly the people want socialism. There isn't an argument against that. Clearly the people want a society where people are more important than profit. There's evidence of that everywhere. If you don't see it, that's because you don't know what to look for. But there's evidence everywhere. So a class analysis would have helped the Garvey movement come to that level of consciousness. But unfortunately, they didn't have the opportunity to reach that level of analysis. But these are the lessons that we can learn from Garvey's work and take forward into the 21st century. So we thank you for coming, and we invite you back next week, September 3rd, September 1st is a commemoration of the great Libyan Jamahiriya. So we're going to talk about Libya next week. So join us when we do that. Go to the Forward Ever shop. And we want to apologize. We couldn't find, well, we found it actually, but we had a problem with the original presentation, so it didn't get into this version. But we have Pan-African Women's Day coming up on September 1st also, 2 days before this next Our Ancestors Voices. So we want to encourage you to tune in. You can go to our website, aprp-intl.org, and get information about how to join our international broadcast for Pan-African Women's Day. It's one of the important institutions in the African Revolution worldwide. So we invite you to participate and tell people. September 1st, Pan-African Women's Day. Get all the specific information at aprp-intl.org, abetterworld.me for these videos. Hood Communists, keep supporting Hood Communists. Tell people, bring people to these forums, you all. Please. Go to all of our programs. We got a number of them. We got 4 more on the screen there, and then this one. So that's 5 different AAPRP programs that happen on a regular basis. Support each and every one of them. And continue to buy my book in the lower right-hand corner, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Just yesterday, Jacksonville, we had another white supremacist walk into some place and kill a bunch of Africans, you all. I mean, I'm tired of talking about it. I don't know what it's going to take to get us to wake up. I mean, this is going to happen to someone you know, someone you love, because we're not organized. We're not taking this seriously. All we care about is Drake and Beyonce and all this damn idiocy. And meanwhile, somebody's planning to kill us. And if we don't start taking this seriously and get our people organized, there's going to be nothing but, I'm sick of hearing this nonsense. We got to pray. The hell, I ain't holding your hand. I'm not praying with you. I'm organizing to strike back at these enemies. You sit there and pray. Pray that I have straight aim when I take aim at these damn enemies. Since you're so damn cowardly, you won't do it. That's what we need to start doing. That's what we're going to start doing. Forward ever, backwards never. We hope you have a great rest of your Sunday evening. We're not apologetic for standing on the dignity of our ancestors. If you don't know to have sense enough to stand on the dignity of your ancestors, your damn problem. We'd love to help you get over that sickness, but we're going to stand up and fight back. That's what we should do. Our people put us here to do that. So stand strong. There is nothing wrong with us other than our cowardice. We can help you get over that. But be strong, you all, and we'll be here next week. Forward ever, backwards never.